Hello YouTubers, welcome back to another video with me, Adam Well Informed. This video unfortunately comes at the expense of my Tesla Model 3. Those that watched my 12-month review of the Tesla Model 3 will know that my car has been hit on two separate occasions by a third party within just a matter of a few weeks, and subsequently that is now being fixed by an authorised repairer. In the meantime, as you can see, I've been provided with this Polestar 2 dual motor long range variant with the performance pack. Saucy stuff. I didn't know what hire car I was going to be assigned until it turned up outside my door, but as soon as it turned up I was pleasantly surprised and intrigued as to how it would stack up against my rear-wheel drive Tesla Model 3. I'm not keen on calling this a full-blown review because I think it would just be best served by owners of the vehicle as they have a much better insight than myself. However, as a fellow electric car owner and owner of a Tesla Model 3, I feel I'm in a unique position to really lay out my impressions of what I like about the Polestar 2, what its imperfections are, and finally, who would be best suited for the Polestar 2. There are some solid positives and unfortunately some weak design spots. One is not really acceptable in my eyes. However, please note this isn't a direct Polestar 2 versus Model 3 comparison. There will definitely be some crossover though and comparisons from time to time, but the reason I didn't want to take the video in that direction is because this video will be more relatable if you are coming from a petrol or diesel car, as ultimately you're more likely to be a prospective buyer of the Polestar 2. I'm not switching from a Tesla Model 3. I've even decided to dedicate a chapter of the video to my my wife, because she had some very strong views to say the least. So before I get started, if you haven't seen my content before, I do a video pretty much every week on my Tesla Model 3. I talk about all things Tesla and electric cars in general. If you like that kind of content, drop us a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Plus, you're going to be the first to know when a secret app that I'm helping to build will be released to the general public, which is in a not too long distant future, by the way. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to be the first to know, you can now follow the Econ Calc's dedicated social media channels located in the video description below, where we'll be posting the app's journey and just the vision ahead. Now with an intro, let's move on to the Polestar 2 long range review. Starting with the exterior, just with some general background information, I think the Polestar 2 lines up quite nicely within the ever-expanding EV universe. And whilst it looks like a saloon car, it is actually a hatchback produced by Polestar. Polestar itself isn't exactly a well-known household name. It's actually a sub-brand for Volvo, who are owned by Geely Holdings Group. Driving the car down the street, strangers and friends would make a conscious effort to ask questions about the car and the Polestar brand. There was genuine intrigue into this vehicle, as much as my Tesla Model 3, which is something I didn't really expect. Looking at the vehicle's exterior shell, it's rather aggressive and quite angular, but it's also relatively tall, and it gets its height DNA from being built on the same platform as the XC40. So whilst gaining a visual height advantage, it actually sacrifices some windscreen estate and drag coefficient in the process, meaning it doesn't quite cut through the air slippery as the Tesla Model 3, and that's partly due to the Model 3 actually sitting a little bit lower down than the Polestar 2. Personally, my favourite part of the car was the rear. The booty may be rather square, but the light that sweeps across the back definitely gives me a Star Wars like lightsaber vibe. But wait, there's some hidden goodies in the booty that won't meet the eye at first. With a gentle kick of the foot, we have a boot opening kick sensor, and as I mentioned before, with it being a hatchback by nature, we're not actually restricted with entry access, so it makes loading the boot a breeze. Those with a young family may be pleased to hear the boot has a range of other features that stand up differently to the Model 3. Like for example, we have a 12-volt socket back here, an elasticated strap, a boot divider, and a ski shutter door. And if I was to ski or snowboard, I'd probably break a leg or two. But the option is there for those that are more adventurous than myself, or if you just haul long items, or yeah, you get what I mean. So the ski shutter door is probably not useful for me, but the Polestar 2 also has underboot storage, just like the Tesla Model 3, and the capacity is big enough to be useful to hold your charger cables. However, what is immensely satisfying is how smoothly the boot opens and closes itself. It's a small but soft detail, and it's just so very elegantly operated. Elsewhere on the exterior we have normal un-aero-friendly door handles. They do however embed a light on the inside of the handle which does become more present at night. The wing mirrors are designed to be frameless, so whenever you go to amend your mirrors, the whole mirror actually moves through the entire process. The charge port is hidden behind a fuel tank like door, which definitely gives me a flashback to owning an ICE vehicle. There is a rubber cap on the CCS port, which may seem practical, but it just feels like it isn't needed. Not quite sure if the rubber cap actually serves any value really. Then there is a cable lock and unlock button inside the port, which I thought was pretty handy to have inside the port. Moving back to the front of the vehicle, thankfully we have a frunk, but it's relatively small, so I'm not sure if you'd use it often, if at all. The wheels were 20-inch alloys and they come with these gold Brembo brakes as part of the performance package. Whilst the alloys look smart, I'd have to disagree on the gold Brembo brakes. Just a stark contrast with the gold is just questionable in my eyes. It's a bit too much for me, but again, for some other people, that may be attractive. Overall, there is a distinctive difference in exterior design philosophy between the Polestar 2 and the Tesla Model 3. The Model 3 is lower and more curvier, whereas the Polestar 2 is more angular and taller than the Model 3 alternative. Even though it's not a Volvo by name, to me it definitely has some Volvo vibes all over it. Moving on to the interior, the setup is more conventional than a Model 3. You will find I'm probably more critical in this section than the exterior, and that's because there are some silly flaws, but also some parts that just aren't to my taste. But this is why I said at the very start of the video, the car will suit a buyer more so than myself. Some parts of the interior are completely subjective, and at times you may find that your opinion will just differ to mine here. Starting off with the seats, it has the upgraded leather seats and they are very comfy, but what I really do love is the thigh support focus. It's something that I'd love Tesla to embrace because it can make a whole world of difference for comfort over a long journey. The seats are also ventilated, however I refuse to even try that feature when it's just above freezing outside, though I suspect it's a rather lush in the summertime. It would probably relieve me of them awkward sweaty back situations, the ones, they're pretty grim, aren't they? The steering wheel feels great, but I don't really understand why I decided to add chrome to part of it. Visually it looks good, but from a practicality perspective, the base of my thumb joint would be on the cold chrome plate, and you'd really feel the temp difference when the heated steering wheel was on, so it was counterproductive at times. If I could change one major part of the interior, it would be the center console. However, at present I think this is heavily influenced by its design concept. By that I mean the whole interior has less buttons than a conventional ICE alternative, thanks to its software and center screen. However, there is way more buttons than the Tesla Model 3, such as the defrost function. The steering wheel has multiple functions like cruise control on it. All the headlights and wiper settings are controlled via the stalks, and I get why they may have done that. I suspect they feared alienating customers with a step too far into a software-led approach and took a safer middle ground, but the Model 3 is that other end of the design spectrum. In my eyes, the learning curve for both vehicles is about the same, but what about all the settings on the screen? Does it take you a while to work it out on the Tesla Model 3? No, that's because the Tesla user interface is optimized and ultimately easier to use. So frequent settings / options tend to be just one touch away instead of 2 or 3 in the Polestar. I just think the software and potentially the cockpit setup would benefit from a more simplified approach. Despite the software not being as polished as the Tesla user interface, it does have a unique selling point, and that is the presence of the App Store, something the Tesla Model 3 doesn't have, and that to me is pretty exciting. The apps available now are limited at this time, however you can add Spotify, YouTube Music, or even a better route planner at any time, so you can get an idea of its potential. It's exciting for me as someone who loves technology, and with time I hope this fills up with all sorts of interesting applications. My personal recommendation is Stadia integration, considering its direct ties with Google. After a short review, I couldn't see any games in the Polestar 2, but the use of Stadia would give the user a whole library of playable console-like games, so it would be played maybe whilst charging or for passengers to play whilst the car is idle. I did a similar thing in my Model 3 as per the video above, so it is possible, but it could run smoother via direct integration in the Polestar 2. Looking at the camera setup, it does differ from the Model 3. I wasn't a fan of the default bird's eye view setup. I know many people do like it. I, however, thought it only really became practical when there was clear white parking bay lines, but for parallel parks, etc., it was less practical. Just my opinion, but I won't miss it when I get my Model 3 back. You can manually select the cameras, which is useful, but I do prefer the default option of the side cameras and rear camera being present as soon as I hit shift on my Model 3. One thing I really did enjoy and embrace about the Polestar 2's camera setup was the front camera located on the grille. If you worry about parallel parking, then this camera combined with the rear camera should hopefully serve you with some reassurance, as it really helps just represent the available space between you and the vehicle in front. Then perhaps the second most controversial part of the interior is the gear knob. After using a stalk, why do we need a gear knob? It's made this entire center console bigger than it needs to be, and it's in the way of the volume knob. There are small pockets on the side of it, but storage is unfortunately compromised with this design. My initial conclusion is that they've built the entire center console setup around the gear knob and transmission. Not only is cabin space compromised, but the drinks holders too. Looking at the one on show, if you want to use the armrests, you usually push this forward, and essentially you then need to decide if you want to crush your drink or have no armrest. If you want to use the second cup holder, then you've then got to sacrifice this space in here as well. Sticking with a conventional setup has really hurt this interior space. There could have been more storage, or even just removed altogether like the Ioniq 5. The rear passenger setup, thankfully though, is well equipped. I believe there were heated seats as per the rear controls, though I never needed to test it because of the car seats. There's an armrest embedded in the middle with cup holders as you'd expect, plenty of footroom, and the roof is entirely made of glass, which is a feature I know the kids love. My only concern about the rear is the old school transmission tunnel. As I mentioned before, I think the interior has been built around this gear knob and transmission setup, so if they can eradicate that, then the rear floor can be flat like the Model 3, and we can have a whole new center console setup. As the rear seems to be trending positively in this review, both exterior and interior, I like it, I really do. Back to the front of the interior though, the biggest flaw in the design may only affect the right hand drive models. Without rain, visibility is fine. You get that height advantage despite looking like a saloon car, but the windscreen is fairly small, and the rear mirror setup seems to have a bigger footprint for the front visual real estate. What really got my back end up, and again I seem to find ways to talk about the rear in this video, not intentional, but backing up my main point, visibility in the rain is poor because the wiper setup is just completely wrong in my eyes. I mean, the passenger has better visibility than the driver because in the driver's line of sight, around a third of the height of the window on the driver's side of the screen is covered in water droplets and you can't wipe it off. Then the smaller you are, like for my wife for example, the more of an impact it has on your visibility. But on the passenger side, it's fully clean, like WTF. So I think this is just some left-hand drive, right-hand drive setup issues that really needs to be looked at. The fit and finish of the Polestar 2 interior is solid, again subjective, but some parts were piano black. I'd personally avoid it as it looks smart, but it's just a fingerprint magnet for sure. We also have wireless fast charging under the screen, which was only for one phone rather than two, and some hidden USB-C ports if you think they'd be useful. Overall, I think you'll be pleased with the finish. The car even had Harman Kardon speakers built in, which deliver a nice, rich and crisp sound. Moving on to the drive and performance, it's really good. Despite the car being heavier, it really can pack a punch whilst moving. I did find the initial response lagged compared to my rear-wheel drive Model 3, but I'm not sure if it's directly comparable because this car weighs more and it has the extra rear motor on the front axle compared to my usual setup, but as soon as it was moving, it was very responsive. Regen braking can be toggled off in the menu, but one pedal driving is entirely possible with the Polestar 2. I even thought the regen braking was strong enough to be practical. The handling was perfectly acceptable, but I found the suspension made the bumps very noticeable, but that stems from the performance changes doing its job really. If you don't want that, maybe just drop the performance pack that's already on the car in this one. As an electric car, it's almost as fun to drive as the Model 3. You wouldn't be disappointed by the drive of the Polestar 2 despite the weight of the vehicle. It is very punchy, but not quite as agile in the corners. Before I move on to my conclusion, as promised, I want to share my wife's opinion of the Polestar 2, which does differ from my own, and she had some strong words to say about the vehicle. So I'm just going to quote just a couple of quotes that she mentioned, not all of them. They will remain private between me and her. So starting off with the first one, who would really want gold seatbelts? Absolute classic. And I sort of agree with her actually on that one. And the second quote that I will tell you and will not keep behind closed doors is, "I want my Tesla back." So as you can probably tell, my wife is not as fan as much as me. However, the more she drove it, the less she started to complain. So while she absolutely detests those gold seat belts, I think the car itself secretly grew on her. We saw another Polestar 2 parked up the other day, and she did prefer the bluey grey light colour. I think officially it may be called Midnight, but it had black seat belts, so visually it ticked that box for her, but she'd definitely pick a Tesla any day. So to summarise, what was my first impressions of the Polestar 2 as a Tesla Model 3 owner? Do I like it? Yes, I do like the Polestar 2. The more I drive it, the more it grows on me actually. It has a strong EV performance, a decent circa 300 mile WLTP range, and visually it stands out as aggressive yet smart looking, ignoring the gold seatbelts of course. You may find I was more critical of the interior setup, and that's just primarily because I'm used to the Tesla Model 3 simplistic setup, as roughly 98% of all controls are found on the screen and the remaining 2% are on the stalk or the wheel. I'm adjusted and acclimatized to the simplicity of software integration, and I think everyone else could adjust to the Tesla Model 3 simplicity. However, there will still be some people who A, just do not like or trust computer software and will stick to conventional ways of buttons and knobs wherever possible, and B, there are people who just simply don't want a Tesla for a variety of different reasons. It may be hard to admit, but it's true that some people just do not want a Tesla, no matter how hard you or I would actively encourage after laying out all the benefits that you could have with a Tesla. Therefore, if you fit in category A or B, as an electric vehicle, the Polestar 2 will be a vehicle you will actively enjoy driving. More importantly, the vehicle has the potential to be even more with software updates. Plus, the brand has a solid base to fine-tune and improve upon. If they make the changes that I mentioned earlier for the interior of the upcoming Polestar 3, then that could be very interesting indeed. However, before some of you go ahead and start thinking the Polestar 2 is a very practical option, I think it may be worth just running it by your partner if you want them gold seat belts and if they're going to be acceptable to them. I'm still getting an earful to this day about it, so it's just definitely worth asking their opinion before you bolt on that performance back. Anyway, that's it from me this week. What did you think to my Polestar 2 review? Did it help? If you got this far, I'd be interested to hear which one you prefer, Polestar 2 versus the Model 3. Drop me a comment of either just Polestar 2 or just Model 3 if you got this far in the video. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share this video with your friends and family. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.